Welcome, everyone. We are very excited that you have chosen to spend the next hour with us for an intriguing conversation celebrating the life and legacy of Virgil Abloh and our corporate commitment to rising Black talent. Please feel free to engage with us through the chat or send questions to ibelong@neimanmarcus.com. The chat function is located at the bottom of your screen and looks like a text bubble. We are recording this session and the video may be sent to the company and used in social media. Throughout the conversation, feel free to submit questions. And if time permits, we will ask towards the end of our session. Okay, so let's get started. I am Jonathan Hall, Director of Belonging at NMG, and it is my absolute pleasure to welcome you all this morning. As an organization, Neiman Marcus Group is on a mission to become the preeminent luxury customer destination. NMG strives to be a place where everyone belongs, where diversity of thought is valued, and where showing up as your full and authentic self is encouraged. To affirm our commitment to investing in rising Black talent, we have invited an amazing host of panelists here from our longstanding partners at Off-White in the Fashion Scholarship Fund to speak about the life and legacy of Virgil Abloh and our corporate commitment to rising Black talent through our partnership with the Fashion Scholarship Fund. Before we get started, I wanted to offer a very sincere thank you to Nikki, Lana, Andrea, Trinice, Peter, Ife, Mecca, really great host of group here to help us talk about our ESG and belonging communications and people services team. Thank you all as well. And without further ado, I'm going to introduce Nikki Ogunnaike, from the Digital Director of Harper's Bazaar, who will be our host and moderator.
Thank you, Jonathan. Good morning, everyone. I am so honored to be here today and share space with you all for the next hour or so. As Jonathan mentioned, I'm Nikki Ogunnake. I'm the Digital Director of Harper's Bazaar. I've been there for just over a year. And I'm just going to jump in and introduce everyone that I have with me here today. First, I'd like to introduce Lana Todorovich. She's the president, as you guys know, president and chief merchandising officer of Neiman Marcus. We have Andrea Grill, who's the chief executive officer of Off-White. Trinice McNally, the founding director at the Center for Diversity, Inclusion, and Multicultural Affairs, and an advisor to Off-White. Peter Arnold, the executive director of the Fashion Scholarship Fund. Ifeoma, who is a Fashion Scholarship Fund board member and diversity and inclusion advisor. And finally, Mecca Hodge, the assistant buyer, Neiman Marcus, and a 2021 recipient of the Virgil Abloh Postmodern Scholarship. Wow, what an illustrious group we have here today. So I'd love to kick things off with you, Peter. Can you tell us a little bit about the Fashion Scholarship Fund and how the partnership with Neiman Marcus Group serves both the students and the associates?
Sure. Thanks, Nikki, very much for the kind introductions. For those of you who don't know, we're an organization, the Fashion Scholarship Fund, that's been around for 85 years. We're arguably the biggest and most prominent education and workforce preparedness organization of its kind, serving talented students that seek to enter the fashion industry. And so every year we have a competition across a variety of case study disciplines: design and product development, merchandising, marketing analytics, supply chain. And it's through that competition which we offer to a network of 66 schools. And these are maybe expected or well-known fashion schools like Parsons and FIT, but also in our network, schools, public and private, at which there are students that would like to get into the industry. And we'd like to think we can support on their journey and maybe make it a more meaningful and more efficient connection and transition. So that's what we do for students who compete and then win and then become recipients of scholarships. Once they are identified as an FFF scholar and a winner of the scholarship, we seek to provide them with mentoring. And that's really where the partnership with Neiman Marcus comes in. We really like each of our scholars to be thoughtfully paired with a mentor. ideally a near peer mentor, someone more senior in the industry that can be relatable and show these students the way forward. We also seek to provide each scholar with a summer internship in the industry. If they're a graduating senior like Mecca was, an entry-level position at a partner company. And we really believe that the scholarship is the point of entry. We are then engaged with these talented students very meaningfully throughout the course of their careers. We have a particular focus on of the BIPOC population of students, as well as students who are first generation to college and students who have demonstrable financial need. But this is a merit-based competition where we really hope to help our corporate partners find the next generation of talent that is going to move forward in the industry. And so Lana Todorovich is a longstanding and esteemed board member at the Fashion Scholarship Fund, and we've slowly but surely deepened our relationship thanks to Lana with Neiman Marcus, and really started to work even more closely in connecting our scholars to mentors from Neiman Marcus, our scholars to summer internship opportunities, and to full-time positions at Neiman Marcus. So it's been a really terrific journey with lots more to come, but a special focus recently on our BIPOC population, and through our partnership with Virgil and the establishment of the Virgil Abloh Postmodern Scholarship Fund, a really meaningful connection to Neiman's and their support of the very specific population of students that we look to move forward. That's my very long-winded introduction, Nikki, but Lana, maybe you want to touch on from the Neiman side, kind of as a counterpoint.
Sure. I mean, I have first of all, extremely strong personal connection to FSF. I've been a board member since 2017 and truly believe in giving back and nurturing, supporting and mentoring new generations that are coming into the fashion industry. I actually think that's all of our responsibility. And then through Neiman Marcus, you know, we support in multiple ways. So one is, you know, the scholarship financial support. We've been sponsorship supporters for a number of years. And currently we are in the process of raising funds specifically for Virgil's Postmodern Scholarship Fund. And, you know, we are doing that twofold. First of all, really activating the fashion community, every imaginable fashion brand that is supporting, you know, this cause and really paying tribute to Virgil. So we have been quite successful with that outreach, but also extending it to the point of sale, meaning all of our stores are engaged in this fundraising, you know, at the point of sale, which is where we really engage not only with our associates, but our customers. So brand partners, customers, our own associates, I think we mobilize, you know, really at the very high level and proudly so. And that's just one piece of it. I think that the second piece that Virgil has touched on, which we support, is really that mentoring and sort of door opening that we provide to these students that is, I think, invaluable for them and invaluable for us as well. Mecca is one of the examples of how that talent then, you know, stayed for us. And I can talk more about, you know, especially to this audience around ways that we've been engaging, but I wanted to give time to Andrea, because I know, Andrea, you're joining us for the beginning of the conversation. And Nikki, turning it back over to you.
Yes, you know, Andrea, I would love to hear from you. You know, it's a twofold question. First, why did Off-White and Virgil want to create the Postmodern Scholarship Fund, and what were the intentions behind its inception?
Yeah, thank you for asking. And first of all, as you can imagine, is a great honor for me being here, working with Virgil from day one. Basically, we made Off-White together from the scratch. It didn't exist, the brand. So it's really a kind of emotional also to me speaking with Virgil about Virgil, you know, after what happened. Basically, you know, Virgil is one of the greatest personification of Black excellence and what success looks like when you are brave and open-minded and believe in yourself and the power of your dream. Also strong enough to push through stereotypes and institutional racism. This gave him the great purpose and even greater push to make rooms for others and open doors for an entire community of people that has the talent and will do to make their voice heard. Basically, Off-White reflects Virgil vision and values, a blank canvas that represent the freedom. Together, we shape a company envisioned as a blank canvas, something that goes beyond a traditional fashion brand. Off-White is more like a movement, a platform that can be shared, creating real opportunities for everyone. This is what we will keep on doing, opening doors and giving voice and space to those who share our values and who will embody Virgil's spirit and beliefs. You know, with the postmodern scholarship, the idea was exactly the same, to create a safe space that could nourish and support the next generation of Black fashion designer, to foster, you know, equity and inclusion within the fashion industry by supporting promising students of Black, African Americans or African descendants. You know, meeting Virgil it completely changed my life. He taught me so much. His lesson and, you know, his vision runs deeper and has helped to shape my mindset and my overall commitment into, you know, and began an open mind, brave, unafraid, and breaking the rules of, and breaking barriers, first of all. And above all, being open and fair to the others. So the approach he had with the fashion system and with people, it's something that I never seen in my, not just career and experience in my life. And this is priceless. I'm super honored to, you know, keep the legacy with the whole 300 employees, and which are for sure will keep the movement on for forever until you know, Fight will exist.
Thank you for sharing, Andrea. Trinice, I'd love to hear from you. You know, I read actually in a Harper's Bazaar story that you and Virgil first bonded over a belt. He noticed you wearing an off-white belt, was it? I'd love for you to tell that story to the audience, and then tell us a little bit about how Virgil impacted your life and how you moved through these systems after, you know, spending time with him.
Thank you for that question. I think that's always the first question I get. And even though it feels really interesting being in this conversation, and like, oh, my WhatsApp buddy, like we are not going to do that same thing. So I spent my morning like going through all of our WhatsApp messages, yeah, to feel grounded. So thank you. We met over like Instagram and Twitter. It was very interesting. And I'm not really a social media person. I think contrary to like what folks think, it feels like it can feel very overwhelming and draining oftentimes. And I was running a march at a rally locally in DC where I live on abolition called Defend Black Women. And our call to action was to center Black women, girls, femmes, and non-binary people in all of our actions, right? When we think about intimate partner violence, it is actually Black men who have the higher percentages of killing Black women in intimate partner violence. When we think about systems of policing, it is usually Black women and gender expansive people that are often at the hands of assault, sexual assault, not to mention humiliation, and over the last 400 years. So I happen to be leading this march because I do a lot of organizing in my community through a Black feminist perspective. And I was wearing all white. Because in my tradition, in the Yoruba tradition, I'm a priest of Oshun and a priest of Obatala, and we believe in we wear white for purity, for calmness, and for peace. And so I was like, yeah, I know that we're about to turn up on the police, essentially, and they don't want us to talk about these issues in our community. So I needed to be in white for grounding, but like, you know, for me, an aesthetic is very important. And I'm like, so what are we going to piece with this fit? The iconic industrial belt, right? Which was my first like introduction to off-white. Like as a younger person, that was like, this is not just streetwear. This is really funky. I feel good. Like it brought together so many communities. because I'm originally from the UK with my roots from Jamaica, and like folks in Europe, like we love Off-White from like a streetwear perspective, but also skater. So it's always been radical, like, you know what I'm saying, in its inception. And for me, that felt like the perfect like piece to put together. And I actually just needed something to carry my machete, if I just could be very honest. I was like, in our practice, we travel with our defense items, not as weapons to hurt people, right? But to feel the power, right, of our ancestors. And I had on the belt and I was talking on CNN with a very interesting reporter. And I thought that somebody hacked Virgil Abloh's account. I would be like, why would Virgil Abloh be talking to me? I was like, this is not real. I was just like, yeah, I was very like, no. And then I got a message from the Off-White account and then the PSA account. And then it was like actually my like department that I run. And I'm like, oh, this is real. I should probably respond and stop like freaking out. So we just started like connecting. And it was like one of the most impactful relationships I've ever had in my life. And I also don't want to say had, because I very much still feel grounded and guided by Virgil. Like every day, random things will happen to me and I'd be like, oh, okay. I see your interesting sense of humor showing up in this way, right? About how I should make decisions. And from the minute we connected, it was about, yeah, I want to learn more about your work. Literally, that was our initial conversation. And I was like, yeah, this is awesome. I want to learn more about your work, right? Because I know that this is a Ghanaian person, first gen. I had just been to Ghana. Like I had always treasured what I knew about Virgil Abloh from the outside, which also felt interesting to watch how social media would choose and pick and when, how they wanted to engage with him. And I was always very curious about like, what was his resilience practice around like making sure that he stayed true to his values, which is why, right? Like PSA exists, right? Which is why we're all here, because Virgil was really about amplifying the voices of marginalized people, period, right? Whether you knew what he was doing or whether you knew what he had his hands in, which was everything, right? Which we all know on this call, he was really, really committed. And I think that the initial conversation that we had was like throughout our entire friendship, right? Countless mornings, countless nights, me waking up in the US and Virgil being wherever Virgil is, because he was everywhere, to like, yeah, what do you think about this idea? Oh, just read your proposal. All right, let's do it. All right, we're sending this over. Like our relationship was so easy. And it made it so easy to work with folks at Off-White that like, that's like my family, you know, like we're very like close in our approach to the work. So yeah, from our inception to the impact that Virgil has had today, I think the thing that has stuck out the most is that two things: if it's the right thing to do, you should absolutely do it. And you can worry about everything else later, right? But if it is the right thing to do, you should always do that. And like remembering the power of a Black radical imagination, right? Because Virgil Abloh belongs to a canon of Black radical imaginators. You know, something that Toni Cave Mbara said is that as a cultural worker belonging to an oppressed people, her job was to make the revolution irresistible, right? And I think that Virgil like did that and more in a way that like we are all on this call, right? And we are all able to be inspired in ways that bring us more joy than pain.
I have chills. Thank you so much for sharing that, I must say. You know, there's an interesting question actually in the chat. I'm keeping an eye on it as well. And the question was, what is one thing that Virgil said that has stuck with you? Trinice, you just shared a few things, but I would love to hear from anyone else who would like to weigh in on this question. Maybe, you know, Peter or Ife or Mecca, people who, you know, are a part of the fund, a part of the scholarship. What is the one thing that he said that has really stuck with you?
Well, I know Trinice would agree. He said many, many things, and he WhatsApped many, many things. But, you know, when we were talking about his experience, which I think is really why he came to us, because he didn't go to Parsons and he didn't go to FIT, although he wanted to. He was first generation. His parents wanted him to be, you know, a doctor, a lawyer, an engineer. He went to the University of Wisconsin. He ended up studying engineering, but also architecture. And he mentioned that he was once in front of his architecture class. And it was at that moment that the teacher said to the class, I just want you to know that not all of you are going to be architects. And Virgil felt that that was a moment where that teacher was speaking to him and saying, you as a Black man are not going to be an architect. And I think with Virgil, that just struck him, and I know it affected me, is he was a door opener and he wasn't going to let that professor get in his way. And he was going to open a door for lots of folks all over the world pursuing lots of disciplines. So for me, that moment, that experience was sort of emblematic of a moment that he seized on to do work.
If anyone else would like to weigh in, please feel free.
Well,
Mecca, you maybe, yeah.
I know, one quote that really sticks out to me is, I remember him saying, always believe that the impossible is possible. I remember just putting that quote on my vision board, at the top of the year. And, just to think that, I was walking through his Figures of Speech exhibit on my 21st birthday to a whole year later, being an inaugural recipient of his scholarship and being amongst 19 other amazing students that won as well. And we're all sitting on a Zoom, with him. It definitely made me feel that the impossible can absolutely be possible. And, I think we all know just how much of a visionary that Virgil was. And he really made me dream bigger than I really had ever dreamt before. Growing up, you think you have all these big goals and these plans, and, you work so hard to achieve those goals. But for him, it was like, take that goal and multiply it by 10. No matter what anybody says and, any kind of obstacles that may come before you, he always took it with humor. He always took it with a seriousness as well, though, and made sure that his vision was always clear, no matter what it is that he tried to approach. So that has always stood out to me. And it's definitely a quote that I live by for sure.
And Mecca, just to add to that, I think he gave an exclusive interview in our fall book and really devoted a significant space and effort and attention to what a postmodern scholarship fund meant for him, which really meant opening those doors and making impossible possible for as many people as he can possibly touch. And the power of his vision and his effort around this is something that, one of the reasons why we're all here today, and I think our industry will be feeling it for a very, very long time.
Absolutely.
Ify, I'd like to bring you into this conversation as well. What was it like working with, on this scholarship as a board member for you? And how has that impacted sort of how you move forward in the world today?
Yeah, thank you for the question. And I want to just make a correction. I'm not a board member, maybe sometime in the future. But I am the CEO and founder of a social impact and equity and culture firm called Pink Cornrows. It is birthed out of movement. I was on the ground in Ferguson. I was on the ground in Baltimore. I was on the ground in a lot of different spaces, serving behind the scenes. Also worked in Capitol Hill and always saw myself as a creative because that is literally all of our first job when we come out, right? It's like we drive the people around us crazy by being creatives. And for some people that doesn't leave. And I think that when I think of Virgil, who as also a first generation individual who is not only the dreams of your ancestors, but the dreams of your parents that are trying to make it here. The pathway and the journey to professionalism is often not just your ambition, right? It's connected to making sure that you represent a lot of different spaces and places that are rooting for you. And I think that's really important to keep in mind, that Virgil came into this space in some ways already the making of a living, at this point now legend, right? But at that time was very iconic. But I do think that there was a lot of that story that resonated with him, not as only as somebody that in many ways on paper was told you shouldn't be here, but we were in the height of movement and I don't want that to be lost as to how this program came to be, people were really trying to figure out how in their day-to-day they were going to cope with Breonna Taylor, how in their day-to-day they were going to cope with George Floyd, and how for many of us, this is not a new issue. When I was in law school, Sean Bell, which was a young man here in New York, gunned down the day of his wedding. He was gunned down on my birthday around the corner from the law school that I attended. And I reached out to his family because he had kids. And I just felt like, what about the family? What about those who are left behind? I do think that bringing that fast forward to what that's meant over the last couple of years, two things. Really want to shout out the leadership of Peter, the board at FSF. I was brought in before many of these, what would we call national racial uprisings had occurred. And we wanted to really be intentional about what does equity, not just diversity and inclusion, which are important, but what does equity really mean in the world of fashion? The world of fashion is not new to the articles about what it means to be, come from a different background that is not white. It's not new to the classism that exists, the elitism that exists, even the colorism that exists. And so what does that mean fast forward when we come to a first generation Ghanaian American, dark skin from the Midwest that has a company called Off-White? I just want us to really think about what he was actually pushing up against before this scholarship was even created. So when I think about that question of what stuck out the most for me with Virgil, when you think about what like this experience building this scholarship, one of the biggest honors, and I love that Andrea was on this call because, you know, to be a leader, there must be people that also believe in your vision to follow. And I really feel like, you know, the postmodern scholarship came from people believing that we're gonna dare to actually break through an industry that honestly, if we wait too long, we're never gonna get permission. And he wasn't trying to get permission. It can be very scary in many industries, including the fashion world, to focus just on Black people. And Virgil wanted the start of this to intentionally focus on Black people, which then raised a lot of different questions about how did this industry come to be, who has been included, and who is this pipeline for? He intentionally wanted us to expand on HBCUs, but he also pushed on the fact that this is not just about HBCUs. He did not go to an HBCU, but he knew that a lot of campuses did not necessarily had historical significance and held on to a tradition to ensure that we had somewhat of a foothold of the professions that keep many cultures together, like the lawyers and the doctors and the accountants and the teachers. But he also knew that culture, creativity, and expression were not new to Black communities. And in fact, many of what we revere in fashion is built on the backs and off the creativity of young people that are not really given the door to come into the fashion industry. So before he left, the conversation had well been expanded beyond the 66 schools that FSF works with. We were talking about community colleges. We were talking about where does talent exist outside of schools? Is school really the space that brings the best talent? That's where Virgil's mind was. So when I think of postmodern, I think Peter and I talk intimately often about literally what would Virgil do, because what we're recognizing is just like equity. Equity is not a destination, it's a process. Postmodern is a process. It's about how do we keep pushing? Where do we keep pushing? And I hope that what we take from this is the full whole person that came into this being, that ultimately in some ways, and we laugh, you know, Peter and I laugh about this, who ultimately came into this purposely, I think spiritually came and left us enough to then be like, all right, y'all handle this. Y'all got it from here. And I think the challenge for all of us is to stay and remain true, not to any one aspect of this scholarship, but to stay true to breaking barriers and breaking doors so that inclusion is radical and not just about representation, so that diversity is not just about diversity of presence, but diversity of thought. And I'll end with this, that one of the things that sticks out to me is if you've ever been on a conversation with Virgil with young people, yes, there are definitely so many young people that want to ask him, like, how did you do this? How did you do that? But there were also some young people that pushed back on Virgil. And Virgil was okay with that. And I think that that's where the next level of this industry has to not only invite or be open to our bodies, they have to be open to our minds. They have to be open to the fact that we may see things differently, and we may want to disrupt this space. He was a disruptor. And I think we have to like really honor what disruption in a very radical way for now our ancestor. What does that look like moving forward? Anything short of that would just be a program. And he did not want to create just a program.
Thank you for that. That was just ultimately just so inspiring. I think what you've said, you know, if you did have any, if you were within Virgil's presence for even, you know, 5 minutes, you couldn't leave that conversation not being inspired, not wanting to do more, not wanting to be a part of his orbit and really push the boundaries on what thought is. And so thank you for sharing that. Mecca, you received this scholarship in 2021. What did you learn from your experience in the program, and how did it prepare you for a career at Neiman Marcus?
I will definitely say that I just learned the importance of having a unique perspective and not being afraid to really lean into it rather than shy away from it. I do think that a lot of students pursuing fashion, and especially Black students, students of color, students that are coming in with some kind of obstacle ahead of them, you kind of feel like you have to go with the book, and you have to feel like you go with, this is the linear path that you follow to get into fashion. This is what you're supposed to do. You're supposed to, you know, speak to this person, and you have to get this type of internship. You have to be this type of person. However, I definitely think that my experience in this program really allowed me to see that, you know, there is no linear path, and that whatever your perspective is, you can combine that with the intelligence that you already have and really work it to your advantage and have it be something that is, you know, remarkable, have it be something that really makes an impact despite, you know, maybe it not necessarily being welcome. And so for me, that was huge. You know, I grew up just really being so focused on book smarts and making sure that I had, you know, the right grades and everything, but never really had the opportunity to really tap into my creativity and really try to figure out how I can make that work critically for this industry and how to move it forward and have it be something that would be celebrated by Virgil Abloh. I mean, it just, you know, it was absolutely mind-blowing for me. And so I think with that, it allowed me to gain a confidence that I hadn't had before. And I know with a company like Neiman Marcus, you know, they're innovators. They're always looking to deliver luxury in a unique way. And so having this confidence to be able to solve problems creatively and critically and to think radically as Virgil did, that really prepared me for this role. And it definitely prepared me to, you know, be the best I can be in this role, more so than I ever expected before. So I'm definitely carrying with me all of the career gems that he provided and all of the amazing advice he instilled in all 20 of us. So yes, it's definitely been just such an impact on me.
That's fabulous to hear. Thank you. You know, I'd love to pose this question to the wider group here. We have a lot of, as you know, illustrious leaders on this panel. How do we continue to advocate for more diversity in organizations? How do we take it from something in theory, something we say we want, to actually doing it, actually putting it into practice? Who wants to start? Big question. Who wants to start?
I don't mind.
Go ahead.
Go ahead. I'm curious now. I get more curious when more people share. I want you to.
Lana, why don't you go ahead? Yeah.
And I did one of those I'm on mute kind of thing. You know, for Neiman Marcus, it's a very authentic way of being. If you think about it, and I'm really resonating with the breaking boundaries concept, because that's so much more than representation, and it's so much more important. If you think about Carrie Marcus Neiman in 1907 as a woman founding a company 13 years before she was able to vote. If that's not breaking boundaries, that's a perfect example of breaking boundaries. And so when you start from a founder, that was breaking boundaries, this becomes sort of a way of how we treat our associates, how we treat our customers, how we treat our brand partners, etc. Now, it starts with actually creating a culture where you can bring your authentic self. And I think that's what Mecca touched on, is that it's not trying to conform to a certain ideal. It's actually bringing exactly who you are in all the glory of differences that we all have. And that then some of all these differences is really something that creates change. And then in terms of just specific things, there are many specific things that need to be done, and there is a huge effort that needs to be put behind this. And we have so much more work to do, both at Neiman's and generally in the industry and in the larger society. And I think that we are putting some very specific things in place. So first of all, let's develop the talent that we have. 54% of our population is actually population of color, which is ahead of US demographics. We are 68% female organization, majority female boards. So they're like on multiple fronts, we are trying to move those boundaries. Now, where we have to do a lot more work is to have that moving those boundaries when it comes to VPs and above. And we are very specifically looking at those practices and how can we move the needle to certain targets that we have set for ourselves, that we can very tangibly say, this is what we've done, and this is how we shaped the complexity of our leadership. So to that point, we are not only looking at the leaders that we have, and providing opportunities for them, and particularly development programs. McKinsey has a pretty spectacular leadership program that we enrolled some of our diverse associates, and it was so on all levels, and it was so successful that we are now expanding it. So it's really, how do you continue to provide those opportunities to people that are already with us, and then how do we change our recruitment practices so that we make that top of mind, and we made that as a very important education for both the people that are interviewing, which is where we are actually now working on having a diverse panel, because we think it's as important to have the diverse panel of interviewers as it is of the candidates, for multiple reasons. And very specific tactics like that and strategies like that we are implementing in order to really be very specific around not just what we are doing, but how are we going to do that. So that's just a little bit of a highlight of how we are doing it at Neiman's.
That's so interesting. Trinice, I'd love for you to weigh in here as well.
And thank you, Lana, for kicking us off, because I think it's really dope when we can all be in conversation intentionally, so many gems, all of you dropped, and just really kind of amplified the type of Virgil was. Just want to honor everything that everyone has said so far. I think it's really important when we think about diversity, right? I think diversity is inherent when we think about organizations and corporations and institutions, if they're simply just trying to follow the law. I don't think that diversity should be the standard of the benchmark. It's not radical enough. It doesn't do anything, right? If we were just here having a conversations, we call us all of our races, immigration statuses, and genders differ, that wouldn't make anything change, right? There wouldn't be any impact. So I think where we have to continue to move is thinking about inclusion and equity from things that are conceptualized, right? So who is making the decisions? How are the decisions made? Who are the people that will be impacted? And I guess the mantra and the manifesto that I use to guide my life is thinking about folks on the margins. So if the most marginalized person does not have access to this opportunity, then it is actually not diverse or inclusive, right? The equity is the process, the strategy. But I think it's the conceptualization that I'm hoping fashion brands will continue, right, to pick up that mantle. and really excited whenever we're able to like release the documentary that Virgil and I were working on, because we're talking about fashion brands like needing to catch up, right? We're talking about the ways that people like will host one-time campaigns, but if there is no lifetime commitment to the people and the work that they're doing, then you actually have just checked a box for a period of time for a magazine feature, right? And that's not the person that we're talking about on this call today, right? We've seen that, but what does it mean to really exemplify supporting blah, 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 you know? And I think that the canon of Virgil's work through just PSA, through the I Support Black Businesses, the 2 campaigns that I started with him and et cetera, they speak to his lifetime commitment, because no one could ever tell you that you worked with Virgil Abloh once and that was it. And that he wasn't actually invested in what your life could be like because of the commitment he's seen you had to the community. So I think if organizations take this same formula, right? What does it mean to center the most marginalized? And how are we exemplifying that? Can I look at your board and feel like I'm reflected? Can I look at the opportunities in your operating budget about how you share resources, about how you make resources accessible beyond institutions, which I'm so glad you said that, right? Because community college folks have less access to opportunities. Suppose you didn't even go to school, right? Suppose that wasn't even an option, like for some of us who grew up undocumented. I grew up undocumented in this country. I scammed my way into an HBCU, but like there's so many folks that don't have those opportunities. So if you don't have that lens and you're not willing to have that openness and receive the critique that we often need, right, to become change makers, then you're not doing this work like in honesty and with integrity. So I think that DEI, like are really good, maybe average, actually super average benchmarks and what our approach to the work should be. But I think our approach should be centering folks at the margins, because to truly honor Virgil Abloh is to truly honor like where fashion and aesthetic and culture comes from. And that's from the continent, because all of the resources were extracted off of the backs in a lot of ways, right? From those African folks who were enslaved. Think about Anne Lowe, first Black fashion designer in America. I talk her name in rooms and people are still like, well, who was Anne Lowe, right? It is not that people are not smart or not interested. It's not accessible information, right? Because no one has prioritized her legacy. So I think it starts from the vanguard of who is at the table and are we actually committed, right? Like beyond a campaign and beyond just a shirt, but like, are you committed to potentially Black women, girls, and men and gender expansive people taking your jobs, right? Because one thing I learned from Virgil Abloh is you should be organizing yourself out of a job so something else can continue to evolve. And I think until we are able to move forward and able to relinquish because we trust our creativity, we will be in this same, iteration of the future.
Trinice, that's so astute. And Ife, yes, I saw you nodding your head, so I want to bring you in here as well. I just want to, there's so much that Trinice had mentioned that I was just like, I don't even have to yes, yes, and yes. For a couple of reasons, because I think part of the beauty of Virgil is that he used both his position and the power that he had for us to have uncomfortable conversations about even the things that we think we're doing well. One of the things that we work on at Pink Cornrows is we push back when people try to pigeonhole us into D&I spaces, largely because what we look at is not only the data of what are the outcomes of these D&I programs, but also where's the accountability? So I will just say that one of the things that I think we can look at broadly are practice in this space. We call it equity, leadership, and culture, because it's important for us to work with the leaders and not create a false equivalency that the person who just got hired should have the same responsibility as the CEO of the company. And oftentimes what happens in organizations is that, and I'm sure many of us have been there, however you've been marginalized, however you are othered, and wherever you fall on the intersectionality map, you are then there to represent all things of that community in that space. And oftentimes that means that you are not given the same grace to make mistakes. You are not given the same grace to be your own version of yourself and not the version of an entire community. And then also you are not necessarily being edified in the other ways that you need, as when we're talking about professionals, in the form of mentorship, training, life support,
mental health support, just holistic support, but you were there to perform. So it's when I hear the diversity question, I get nervous about who are we asking to do what, right? And I think that for us that focus on leaders, we want to make sure that we're having real conversations about not just do we have programs to address diversity and inclusion, or even are we looking at recruitment? Are we looking at even promotion? Is your company safe? And do you have the tools to identify what safety looks like? Because we are still finding that it's actually hard for people to still tell that, like, I like my job, but my supervisor may not necessarily make me feel safe. Or that there are conversations that are happening that I'm not included because I didn't grow up that way. So these conversations are actually maybe even unintentionally excluding me from being included and weaving into the culture, right? So that's where I get nervous when we have high numbers of diverse communities being represented on reports, but then we have high numbers of attrition and people leaving because it just wasn't safe enough, right? So I do think that there's a conversation around safety that the fashion industry still has to reckon with. And I do think that Virgil's pipelines like FSF's, and Virgil Abloh's Postmodern are going to challenge. We're going to have other problems, which is a good thing, right? More equity, more problems. We're going to have problems where we're going to have communities actually talking to newer communities about, can we coexist together and what does that look like? And then the final thing that I want to share or admonish is that it should not take somebody great dying. It should not take community members dying for large industries to then respond in this way. And I do think that we are still working across industries as to how it should not take Black death or even Black exclusion for us to then be included and for us to be prioritized. And I think that's a really hard thing that we're still kind of grappling with. And what I love about the intentionality about FSF is that Virgil created something that would literally have to stay behind longer than him. Right. So I do think that when organizations, and Neiman Marcus is showing a great example of how do we extend the conversation beyond the presence of individuals? How do we build upon it so it doesn't stay stagnant where it's at? And one of the advice, because I see there's quite a bit of people on this call, I don't even think I knew how many people were speaking to us. So now my introversion and I'm starting to get nervous. But what I will say is that if you have the power to bring in different voices throughout the lifespan of someone's career, do it. Not because it's Black History Month, not because it's Women's Month, not because it's Pride Month, do it. Because human beings are what's going to change the industry, and we need to be and encounter more human beings to change what is possible. One training is not going to fix that. So we have to also move beyond the thought that a training is going to be the thing that, especially think about if you're on the margins, what this means when you have these diversity and inclusion trainings. And then when that consultant leaves, you're like, oh crap, am I supposed to rely? I think they think that everyone's going to get it overnight and that I'm going to be safe. And that is something that we have to move beyond that mentality. And I love the fact that Peter and I proudly boast that we've been like work married for about 3-4 years. And we probably couldn't get rid of each other if we tried, because part of it is also how you build authentic. When I hear the word authentic, it's not just about presence. It's about how are you willing to struggle? How are you willing to challenge? How do you confront problems? How do you iterate when problems come up? And I am excited about the challenge of what it means for these Virgil Abloh scholars for Mecca, where Mecca is at, to get to the place where when she wants to challenge her space, she is not seen as a threat. She is not seen as somebody that's going to be a problem. She's not going to see as somebody that's no longer going to be on the C-suite track, that she's going to be seen as exactly the person that is needed to keep the longevity and sustainability of this space, because her audience is bigger than the current reach of Neiman Marcus or wherever space she's at. That's the imagination of the space that we need. We are valuable already. And therefore, if we see and implement that value, we're no longer a threat. So I think that's my dream for diversity, where we don't bring in one or two, we bring in just as many as we need, because we're not a threat. And if we're a threat to the right things, right? We're a threat to the things that actually need to be broken, not the status quo and trying to maintain the status quo. and get credit for it. Sorry, it's really important that we mention that when we come in, people want to get credit for that, and stop getting credit, right? Do the work.
I really wish we were in person so I could lead us all in a round of applause for this moment of the conversation, because it is truly just so epic to be here. We have about 8 minutes left, but I just wanted to say that because I know I'm going to be walking away from this conversation just feeling so filled and eager to bring this to Hearst as well. So this is, helpful for me as well. Peter, my question for you is, having a diverse workplace is imperative, as we all know, to a company's well-being. So I'm just curious, what are some of the ways a company can align their DE&I efforts with the overarching organizational goals?
Thanks, Nikki. I mean, I think our friend Iffy's a very tough act to follow, but I want to just, echo what she said and what Trinice said about equity versus DEI. I think it's really important for us to understand what equity means. I know Virgil wanted us to do some hard thinking about it. He came up with postmodern very deliberately because it connotes so much. And I know he was a seed planter. So he would, this was just one of many seeds he planted at the FSF, but he expects just the conversation we're having and the questions we're asking and the disruption that I hope it engenders. That was his plan. He came to us very intentionally. As Mecca knows, he would speak to Mecca and her scholars and say, I have all the time in the world, just keep talking. And he knew he didn't, but that was his approach. And that's when Trinice says, I can't refer to him in the past. I can't feel that way either, because I feel like he's right here. He expects so much of us. But what I will say is, the person, one of the many people who has now a legacy, which is a privilege, and is meant to execute on it. This is a long game. This is not going to happen tomorrow. After I went to a number of luxury brands and said, you know what, Virgil is gone, but I need the equivalent of Virgil. I need some successors to speak to the Virgil Abloh scholars and represent what Virgil started. And a lot of those companies or brands said to me, we don't have a senior creative of color. We don't have an executive color that can have this conversation. So for me, that's what we have to solve for. And that is going to take some time. And this conversation about equity means it's great for us, the FSF and the Virgil Abloh Scholarship Fund, to start and to give a financial award and get a mentor and get a summer internship or a job. But there's a runway of support that we really need to provide to make sure that there's truly there is a baseline of fairness to anybody who's seeking to enter and succeed in the industry. And we're talking about the next 3 to 5 years. And when Iffy talks about mentoring, yes, it's great to have a senior exec mentor you, but we have an equity committee. We have a lot of alumni of color on that committee who say I want to hear from the senior person, but I'm afraid to hear from the senior person about certain things and talk to them. I also want someone that's near peer. I want someone that I can talk to safely about what it means to succeed at this company and to ask for a raise or to ask to be transferred. So, my broad answer, Nikki, to a commitment of our corporate partners that is deep and meaningful. And it does speak to the relationship we have with Neiman's and what Neiman's is undertaking this month and in the future to really build a cadre of talent from the folks we're finding. And echoing Iffy again, I think what we need to tell our corporate partners is it's not just 66 schools, it is community colleges. It is a kid who may or may not be able to go to a community college. That's talent. And if you really are committed to finding talent, we have to open up that pipeline and that funnel in a way that I know Virgil intended. He liked to start with us because it was a great place of beginning. But I think, lots of work to be done on both sides, Nikki, in terms of the talent and where we find it, the openness that our corporate partners have to where to look for it, and then how to support it once hired. Because as Lana touched on, I think there's an attrition rate of talent of color that is a problem to solve for. So, this is a long game. And I think we're all on this panel very committed to playing it and winning at it, but it will take some time and some consistent, meaningful effort.
Lana, I don't know if you wanted to weigh in here, but feel free.
Listen, I think that it's just so many powerful messages. I think it's going to take us all, time to really take the full impact of the depth of what we are talking about. But as I'm hearing it, it's just the enormity of the work that's ahead of us, and the commitment and that we all have, and the commitment that we need to go out there, Peter, to your point, and really find. I mean, something really touched when you were talking about going out there and looking at the design community, for example, and how do we promote that, and how do we bring new talents from all kinds of schools into the fold, because creativity is not the name of the school. Creativity comes from within. And that's, I think, what Virgil represented so well. And then really creating the initiatives to foster this greater equity, because the equity issues are business issues. And I think once these companies that you're mentioning actually internalize that, I think that's where the real power will come from, because it is important to our associates, it is important to our customers, and it is critical really to longevity of all of our businesses. And I think once that sort of sinks in with the larger community, I think is when we're going to start making more movement in this direction. And just touching on the designers, because we have this unique relationship with a lot of design talent, and something that recently was on social media is this Black creative director, John Dean, of a renowned brand, who joined Neiman Marcus as a brand. And he basically, communicated that this is his, basically with his tribute to Virgil, and that Virgil showed him the way that this is possible. And there are multiple, I think, designers that we are working with very closely, and giving them the exposure and giving them a platform, to express their creativity fully.
Thank you, Lana. This is time. So first of all, I want to thank everyone for this really inspiring, fantastic conversation. I know everyone's going to leave just feeling so fulfilled and charged, honestly, to do more. I'm going to toss it back to Jonathan, who is going to close us out.
Thank you, everyone, for attending this panel. I hope you thought the conversation was inspiring and informative. I feel incredibly proud. I was sitting over here in the background, like jumping up and down, like, oh my God, this is the perfect conversation to have. And a special thank you to Nikki for so thoughtfully leading us through this amazing conversation. She did a fantastic job. And to all of our panelists for their meaningful input on how we all have a role to play. Corporately, we're on a mission to be a more diverse, equitable, and inclusive workplace. And I encourage you all to continue the conversations in your team meetings, right? The conversation shouldn't stop here. And it should go into your communities as well. We would love to hear your feedback. Please submit any additional questions or concerns or comments or whatever to ibelong at neimanmarcus.com. Thank you, and have a fantastic rest of your day, you all.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.